If you had told me that one day I'd be sitting in a doctor's office, anxiously awaiting the news of whether I was pregnant or not, I would have dismissed it with laughter. No 14-year-old ever aspires to be in such a predicament, yet there I sat. It was a vibrant spring day, the sun beaming directly into my eyes, forcing me to gaze down at my feet. I couldn't deny the nervousness that gripped me. As I glanced up, squinting from the sunlight, the doctor stood before me, his own apprehension evident. Did his expression signify that I was truly pregnant? A sudden wave of perspiration trickled down my back, and my skin felt ablaze. He motioned for me to follow him into another room and, without meeting my gaze, instructed me to take a seat. Then came the moment that halted me in my tracks. "Luna, I regret to inform you that there's some troubling news," he began. My eyes welled up with hot tears as I braced myself for what he would say next. And then he dropped a bombshell. "It appears that you have a rare hormonal disorder. Despite being only 14 years old, your test results indicate that you are biologically closer to 63 years old." What this means is, I didn't catch the rest of his words. My surroundings blurred, and it seemed like I might pass out. 63 years old. Did that imply I wasn't pregnant? Tears welled up in my eyes. I must have started crying. The next thing I knew, the doctor was seated beside me, reassuring me that everything would be all right. He mentioned that there were specialized researchers for this type of disorder. It was almost surreal to think I had mistaken early menopause for pregnancy. He continued to elucidate that my absence of periods and frequent hot flashes were attributed to this condition, all while I was enduring one of my most intense hot flashes right then and there. It felt like I'd been thrust into an inferno, drenched in sweat and burning up. The doctor advised me that I should have brought a parent or guardian with me, as I legally couldn't obtain the medication he intended to prescribe without an adult. Everything he conveyed was bewildering, and all I wished for was an escape. Why couldn't I be like any other girl my age, just normal? It's absurd when I reflect on it, because when I got my first period, I genuinely believed I was facing death. I vividly recall confiding in my friend Evelyn that I wished I'd never have another one. That's how excruciating it was. It felt like I was hemorrhaging. Yet, as I left the doctor's office, all I yearned for was to experience it again. Life could change so swiftly, and I berated myself for discarding those wishes so easily. Even more challenging than learning that I would never bear children was the prospect of sharing this news with my mother. After all, without her, obtaining the hormone pills wouldn't be possible. But what difference would they truly make? I felt like an anomaly. How had my life unraveled to this point? Just a few months earlier, I had been a typical teenage girl, bemoaning school, crushing on boys, and hanging out with friends. Now, I felt like an elderly woman confined in a youthful body. I convinced myself that nothing could be more agonizing than this as I strolled home, attempting to drown my emotions with blaring music in my ears. And to think I'd been so foolish to entertain the idea of being pregnant. I mean, get a grip, Luna. I had procrastinated seeing the doctor for far too long due to my irrational fears. The peculiar symptoms had begun plaguing me about 6 months ago. Initially, my menstrual cycle ceased. Then, I began sweating excessively, and I could hardly get a good night's sleep because I constantly felt overheated, even in the midst of winter. At first, I dismissed it as mere imagination, but the more I dwelled on it, the more I sensed a profound shift within my own body. I inadvertently broached the subject with Evelyn one weekend when she was staying over, and she suggested, "Luna, maybe you're pregnant." My cousin once shared a story about a girl who went swimming with some guys and ended up pregnant, like, for real. I chuckled at the idea initially. I mean, who gets pregnant from something like that, right? However, as time passed, I found myself considering the possibility. I resorted to Google, and everything seemed to point to pregnancy. Reluctant to purchase a test, fearing judgment from the pharmacist, I ultimately opted to consult a doctor. I can't say which piece of news I would have preferred, being pregnant or what I eventually learned. Upon returning home, I spotted my mother's car in the driveway. I had to feign that I was at school, Even though I had discreetly slipped out during lunch for my appointment, my heart raced with trepidation as I entered the house, haunted by the fear that she might have already sensed that something was amiss. Fortuitously, my mother was engrossed in a phone call, allowing me to slip into my room unnoticed. Once inside, I collapsed onto my bed and let my emotions pour out. Tears streamed down my face as I dwelled on how wretched I felt and the dread of revealing the truth to my mom. And what about my friends? What would they think of me? Suddenly, a thought I hadn't even considered flashed across my mind. Was my life at risk? The doctor had mentioned that I was biologically akin to a 63-year-old. So what did that mean? Was I destined to pass away in 10 to 15 years? Anguish surged within me. It felt profoundly unjust. I was only 14 years old, with my entire life ahead of me, or so I had assumed. That evening, I couldn't bring myself to eat. I felt hollow, and perhaps that's what I was, right? There were no embryos inside me, no eggs awaiting transformation into life. It seemed as if I might as well be lifeless. I closed my eyes and buried myself under the covers. I knew sleep wouldn't come easily, but maybe, just maybe, I'd awaken to discover this was an immense, dreadful nightmare, and I was simply a normal girl once more. 5 minutes later, my mother's voice reverberated through the house. I attempted to block it out, but soon realized she was calling for me. I really didn't want to confront whatever issue she had right now, but if I didn't go downstairs, she'd continue shouting. My mom, a single parent with a demanding job, was often on edge. She wasn't going through an easy time herself. I made my way downstairs, quickly glancing in the mirror to check if my eyes were too swollen from all the crying. She waited at the bottom of the stairs, and there was this wild look in her eyes. Had she been drinking? I knew she had been drinking more lately due to stress, but this seemed different. As she raised her voice at me, her words almost seemed to spit out. "Why in the world do you think it's acceptable to skip school, young lady?" I heard from someone that they saw you at the clinic. Care to explain? You're hiding something from me, aren't you? I just stood there, silently staring at her. With her hands on her hips, I suddenly felt incredibly small and vulnerable. In a hushed voice, I muttered that I didn't want to discuss it. I hoped she would leave me alone, but instead, she seized my arm and led me into the living room. "Tell me what's happening right now, or you're grounded," she demanded. "Mom, well, it's complicated," I began, my voice quavering. Then, unable to hold back, I broke into tears. Amidst my deep sobs, I finally revealed to her that I couldn't have children. I confessed that I had visited the doctor because I was experiencing some unusual symptoms, omitting the part where I had suspected I was pregnant. That would have been too much to bear. She would have been furious. Instead, I told her that I needed her signature to obtain hormone replacement pills for my premature menopause. Menopause? What do you mean by that? Does this mean I'll never become a grandmother? She exclaimed. Her reaction shocked me. I couldn't believe it. I had just informed her about my peculiar medical condition, and all she seemed concerned about was her potential role as a grandmother. Frustrated and hurt, I rushed into my room and slammed the door. My mother's behavior felt incredibly self-centered. I wondered how we were even related. Later that night, there was a gentle knock on my door. It was my mother. I didn't want to face her, but she entered anyway. She was still crying, and she began to apologize, admitting that it was her fault and that she felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. I couldn't comprehend what she meant. She confessed that she had continued to drink while she was pregnant with me, despite knowing it was wrong. Perhaps my mother was grappling with guilt, thinking she was somehow responsible for the disorder I had. I turned to her and implored her to stop blaming herself. It wasn't her fault. The doctor had explained that it was a rare disorder, and it wasn't anyone's fault. It simply happened, and unfortunately, I happened to be one of the few affected. I realized there was no value in holding a grudge against my mom. A disheartening thought crossed my mind. I might not have much time left. It was then that I realized I couldn't go on living in that state of despair. I needed more information. The following day, my mom and I returned to the doctor's office, where he provided a thorough explanation. He informed me that I would need to take hormone pills for the rest of my life. Upon hearing this, I interjected, saying, "So, what you mean for the next 10 years? Because then I'll die, right?" Both the doctor and my mother stared at me in shock. To my surprise, the doctor actually chuckled. "Die," he replied. Luna, no dear. This is a serious hormonal issue, but it won't end your life prematurely. Yes, biologically, you're similar to a 63-year-old, but you still have a long life ahead of you. Who knows, by the time you're 20, there might be a miraculous cure for this. Don't lose hope. His words were easy for him to say. He wasn't the one dealing with barren ovaries and the bleak prospect of a childless future. I felt as though I had been catapulted into adulthood, bypassing the carefree years of girlhood. Inside, I felt aged beyond my years. I couldn't help but worry that no one would want to be with me romantically, and that I would become the subject of ridicule at school, as if being a teenager wasn't already challenging enough. I felt grateful that my mom was there with me because she seemed to grasp the situation better than I did. The doctor instructed us to wait outside while he prepared my prescription, asking us to return in a month. We sat there in silence, the doctor tending to another patient, assuring us he wouldn't take long. After about 10 minutes, the door creaked open and an elderly lady emerged. She cast a warm smile my way and remarked, "Chin up, honey. Life can't be that bad, can it? Just look at me. I'm 89, and I'm on my way out. But hey, I'm still smiling." I blinked in response and offered a nod, taken aback by her unexpected words of encouragement. I briefly closed my eyes, attempting to gather my thoughts. When I reopened them, the old lady had vanished, and my mom stood there, extending her hand. "Come on, honey. Let's retrieve your medication and head home. You're going to be all right, I promise," she assured me. In that moment, I believed her. I knew I would be okay, because honestly, there's always someone out there dealing with challenges far more formidable than your own. Furthermore, I'm far too young to be preoccupied with thoughts of having babies. I'm confident that in 15 years, I'll have the opportunity to adopt a child, or perhaps medical advancements will offer a cure. Who knows, maybe even men will be capable of childbirth. The future is uncertain, and anything can happen. From that day forward, I resolved to adopt the same optimistic attitude as that wise old lady. After all, life isn't really all that bad, is it? What are your thoughts on my story? Please feel free to share your comments. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories.